What if I told you that the first nuns were not Christians? What if he reveals to you that long before they existed, the convents, there were women who turned away of the world to serve a mystery older than life-owned church? Since we were children, many of us, we grew up with a clear image in the mind. Women in black and white robes, walking in silence for the stone corridors of the convents, with a serene and mysterious look in their eyes. But Dean, no one ever explained to us where it came from. They came, who were, in fact, the first nuns, and why chose to disappear from the world. This is not only a historic journey, it is a descent into the deeper roots of the sacred feminine, a mystery that has been buried, distorted, and silenced for centuries. Let us reveal the truth that many do not want you to know. The nuns, just like the we know today, they did not emerge from nowhere. Their history starts with fire, with blood, with rebellion. They were women who chose say no to the marriages forced, to male power, to the life that others them imposed. They chose lock yourself in, but not for weakness. They did by faith, by the force, by the freedom. In this video, we will unearth the hidden origins of nuns. We will discover, as the ancient pagan priestesses, they sowed the seeds of a vocation that survived empires, inquisitions, and revolutions. We will see how Christianity adopted, transformed, and in some cases he hid these practices sacred feminine. I'll tell you, I warn you, once you hear this story, you will never see a nun with this again. The themselves eyes. Because behind every habit, every vow of silence, there is a story of resistance, ancestral wisdom, and a deep connection with the divine. Prepare yourself. What you are about to discover is not in the religious books. Before there was a single Christian cross, already there was women devoted to mystery. In the ancient Rome, the virgins' vestals, they were sacred figures. They guarded the eternal fire of the goddess Vesta, symbol of the home, of the collective soul of the empire. They had to, having remained virgins for 30 years, they were respected, feared, and in a certain sense, untouchable. Their vote was not a prison, but a spiritual privilege. They did not respond to the men, but to them gods. In Egypt, the priestesses of Isis practiced healing rituals, sacred music, and connection with the divine feminine. They lived in temples, governed by their own rules, and channeled the power of a mother goddess who was his guide, protector, and queen beyond. In Greece, devotees of Demeter and Persephone participated in the mysteries of Eleusis, secret rituals that promised access to truths beyond the death. Those women were not simple nuns. They were guardians of a knowledge forbidden, bearers of a spiritual legacy that official history tried to bury. These female cults shared elements that would later define Christian monastic life: celibacy, community life, rules, strict vows of silence, and above all, a deep dedication to the invisible world. But how? We went from those pagan priestesses to Christian nuns. The answer is not in a straight line. It is in the shadow. With the expansion of Christianity, many elements of the religion's ancient were absorbed, reinterpreted, or condemned. The figure of the sacred woman was purified and silenced, but she did not become extinct. Where once they served goddesses, now served Christ. Where temples were once guarded, convents are now built. Vestals were transformed into consecrated virgins, priestesses and nuns. Wisdom ancient was hidden under new habits. Coincidence? Convenience? Spiritual strategy? Some historians believe that it is precisely from this transition emerged the early forms of female monastic life. Women who had previously lived apart from the world, now converted to Christianity and reorganized under new rules. The church absorbed what he could not destroy, and so was reborn the consecrated life of the women, under a new name. But the essence, that ancient connection with the eternal, with it invisible, with that which escapes the eyes of power, still remains. While the Roman Empire fell in decline and Christianity began to spread among the persecuted, There was women who made a radical decision to dedicate themselves completely to a life of faith, purity, and resistance. In a world where the women they were seen as property, forced to marry young and relegated to silence, some dared to say no. No to marriage, without taxes for the children, no to the male domination. It was a silent but fierce revolution. These women, they began to be known as consecrated virgins. One of the most emblematic was Saint Thecla, disciple of the Apostle Paul. According to the apocryphal texts, Thecla abandoned everything to follow the path of Christ. She was condemned to die in the Roman arena, but it survived. For many, one miracle. For others, a threat. Another crucial figure was Phoebe, mentioned in the letter to the Romans as a deaconess, a woman with spiritual authority in the early Christian community. Her existence proves that from the beginning, women played an active role in building the new faith. But why chastity? Because in a society where the female body was controlled, offered, and negotiated, renouncing sexuality wasn't repression, it was rebellion. The vow of chastity was a cry for freedom. It was saying, my body no longer belongs to the world but to heaven. By choosing to be brides of Christ, these women freed themselves from the shackles of society. They ceased to be daughters, wives, or mothers, and became something new, something the world didn't understand, and that we still struggle to comprehend today. In those early centuries, organized convents did not yet exist. Many of these women lived alone or in small communities, in humble homes on the outskirts of cities, dedicated to prayer, helping the poor, and contemplation. At first, the church didn't know how to react. Were these virgins holy or heretics, divine inspiration or a threat to the patriarchal order? Over time, their numbers grew, and it was then that the ecclesiastical authorities decided to regulate what they could not prevent. The first rules were born. The first exclusive spaces for consecrated women, the need to control what was previously uncontrollable. And so, the flame that had begun in the depths of the female soul began to enclose itself in structures, but it didn't go out. These early Christian women laid the groundwork for what would later become nuns, and they did so not out of obedience, but out of love, out of faith, and out of a profound need to belong only to God. As the centuries passed, Christianity ceased to be persecuted and became a power. The empire adopted the cross, the clergy organized, and that feminine spark that burned on the margins was called to order. But order doesn't mean submission, it means structure, and the women once again knew how to adapt without losing their inner fire. The birth of female monasticism dates back to the 4th and 5th centuries, when the eremitic life, living in solitude, prayer, and fasting, began to transform into communities organized under common spiritual rules. A key figure was Saint Scholastica, sister of Saint Benedict. According to tradition, she founded the first women's monastery under the famous Rule of Saint Benedict, a set of rules that defined how monastic life should be lived: silence, work, humility, obedience, prayer. Her convent was not a prison, it was a refuge, a space where women could live among equals, seeking God through the pressures of the world. Little by little, the first female religious orders emerged: the Benedictines, the Cistercians, the Poor Clares, each with its own charisma, way of life, and spirituality. Within its stone walls, the nuns built not just convents, but inner civilizations. They copied manuscripts, preserved knowledge, cared for the sick, taught poor girls, and farmed. They were intellectuals, artists, doctors, and philosophers. In many cases, they lived with more dignity than married women abroad. And within those walls, a powerful figure emerged: the abbess. An abbess could rule a convent with absolute authority. Some even had more influence than the local bishops. They elected novices, administered lands, and negotiated with kings. They were spiritual and political leaders. living examples that feminine power doesn't always require a throne. A cell and a crucifix are enough. Of course, not everything was mystical and perfect. There were also tensions, restrictions imposed by Rome, and attempts to control these women who, even cloistered, remained dangerously independent. But the legacy was planted. From the 12th century onwards, the number of women's convents multiplied throughout Europe. Some were poor and humble, others were true mystical palaces. But they all shared the same essence, a life dedicated to the invisible. The nuns were no longer just rebellious virgins. They were now part of a spiritual network that spanned continents, an army of silent women holding the soul of the world. And so the vow of chastity became a commitment, seclusion became freedom, silence became a sacred language that only the initiated could understand. The Middle Ages were not only darkness, it was also a time of hidden lights, of women who, cloistered from the outside, sparkled brightly from within. Within the walls of the convents, many nuns not only prayed but also wrote, healed, composed music, and had visions. Some were mystics, others intellectuals. Many were leaders who challenged the norms without speaking out. One of the most fascinating was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess. She was a visionary, composer, physician, and writer. She received mystical revelations that she captured in theological and poetic works. She corresponded with popes, kings, and emperors. And although she was a nun, she spoke with the power of an Old Testament prophetess. Another was Catherine of Siena, who came to influence papal decisions. A woman with no formal education, but with such profound faith that she managed to convince the Pope to return from Avignon to Rome. How? With passionate letters and a spirituality that moved even the most hardline leaders. And what can we say about Juana Inés de la Cruz in colonial Mexico? She entered the convent not out of religious vocation, but because it was the only place where she could study freely. Her cell became a library, her habit, armor. She was a philosopher, poet, and critic of ecclesiastical machismo. She was forced to remain silent, but her words still resonate. These women lived a double game, obedient on the outside, revolutionary on the inside. They educated girls, preserved manuscripts, practiced ancient medicine, and helped the poor. In a world where women were invisible, nuns were silent beacons, and some were storms disguised as calm. However, this autonomy began to cause discomfort. As Vatican control increased, many of these female voices were suppressed. Some views were declared heretical. Other women were forced into complete seclusion. Fear of female power, even spiritual power, began to stifle what for centuries had been a vital source of wisdom. But the fire was still there, hidden, latent, waiting. Because even when history silences them, nuns continue to speak, in songs, in prayers, in the margins of manuscripts that still whisper forgotten truths to us today. The world has changed. Cities have grown, temples have emptied, technology has invaded everything, and yet they're still there, silent, invisible, resisting. In an age that idolizes speed, noise, and exposure, the simple fact that a woman chooses silence is a radical act. Renouncing sex, money, ego seems to many incomprehensible, but it isn't. Today, nuns are no longer just figures of the past. Many are on the margins of the modern world, caring for refugees, treating the terminally ill, teaching children to read and write in war zones, and rescuing women victims of violence. They no longer seek the limelight, but their impact is quietly profound, and yet the symbol of the nun has been distorted. Cinema has turned her into a figure of fear or caricature. Pop culture has transformed her into an object of mockery or fetish. The habit, which once represented sanctity, now carries multiple interpretations, some unfair, others mysteriously provocative. But behind that habit, something ancestral still beats. Every nun is a living paradox. She renounces the world to sustain it. She is silent to listen to the eternal. She locks herself away to fly within. Is it blind faith? Is it trauma disguised as a vocation? Or is it a higher form of freedom we no longer understand? Perhaps nuns are the last mystics of the West, the last guardians of a language lost among prayers, songs, and gestures that no one can decipher anymore. And although their numbers have diminished, their symbol persists. Because the world, even if it doesn't say so, still needs women to sustain the invisible. From the Vestals pagans until the virgin martyrs, from medieval mystics to the activists invisibles of today. The nuns did not emerge from nowhere. They are the echo of a lineage ancient, the persistent whisper of the sacred feminine that has survived empires, inquisitions, wars, and contempt. They taught us that silence can be more powerful than a scream, that surrender isn't always submission, and that renouncing the world is sometimes the most profound way to transform it. The next time you see a nun, don't look at her with pity, fear neither incomprehension. See her for what she is, a guardian of the mystery, a rebel dressed in obedience, a woman who chose to disappear, to belong only to the eternal. And now tell me do you think these women were silenced, or they chose silence as your most powerful form of speech? If this story surprised you, I invite you to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who still thinks that already knows everything about nuns, because there are secrets that can only be told in a whisper.